we'll be giving away 2 tickets to OSH, plus talking about the issues this week hitting aviation on this episode of Taking Off. Hi guys, I'm Dan Milliken, and it's been a little while since our last aviation news rant, but the positive side is that I've been really busy with my day job, the one that pays the bills. So that's a good thing. We're going to talk about vaccines and impossible turns, and at the end of the show, show you how to win that pair of EAA AirVenture Oshkosh tickets. But first, let's talk about flight instruction. Okay, the big news. The FAA has been pushing through legal enforcement for what can amount to a fundamental shift in flight training. We've all been treating flight training like it's, flight training. The FAA wants to call some parts of flight training as carrying of persons or passengers for compensation, and that's a can of worms for sure. And here's what happened. Warbird Adventures in Florida was providing flight instruction in their vintage limited category airplanes without an exemption for the operation. The FAA issued a cease and desist based on FAR 91-315, which simply says, no person may operate a limited category civil aircraft carrying persons or property for compensation or hire. Well, everyone, except now the FAA, has considered flight instruction not carrying for compensation. And the case was often running through the courts. Well, the U.S. Court of Appeals landed on the FAA side. And what are we talking about exactly? This is the can of worms. The issue here is the FAA tying together flight instruction with carrying persons for compensation or hire. So several airplane groups asked the FAA for clarification because that interpretation can absolutely kill a lot of flight instruction. And last week, the FAA finally obliged. And it's not pretty. They're doubling down. In the clarification, the experimental and primary category are also now included in their enforcement according to FAR 91-319 and 325, which all have mirrored language for primary and experimental. And here's what the FAA is saying. Owners of experimental in their own aircraft cannot receive flight instruction without FAA permission to do so, and that's called a Letter of Deviation Authority, or LODA. Of course, all owners of limited category are prohibited from receiving instruction in their planes. And here's the biggie. Owners of experimental category aircraft cannot receive flight instruction in their own planes without an exemption. This is insane. You buy an airplane and the FAA, our guardians of aviation safety, say, thou shalt not get training in your airplane. And this is why we need organizations like EAA and AOPA to keep the bureaucracy from not only killing general aviation, but from killing pilots. And hopefully their advocacy can get the FAA to change their tune, because this is unsafe. What do you think about the situation? Leave a comment below. Okay. Lately, there's been another rash of impossible turn talk. That's the return and landing on the runway you just took off from. This is very important because engine out on takeoff, or better described as loss of thrust on takeoff, is, out of most emergencies in piston aircraft, one of the higher probability occurrences. The killer here is not the loss of thrust, but rather the low altitude stall that occurs when a pilot tries to extend a glide by pulling back on the yoke. Also, there have been some that wish that we'd call it the improbable turn rather than the impossible turn, but I'm afraid that's not really going to catch on. The problem with the term impossible is that in the minds of most Type A pilots, impossible is another way of saying, oh yeah, hold my beer. It appeals to the Han Solo in here that says, no matter what the odds are, me, out of everyone, can pull this off. But physics always has the last words, and there are many pilots no longer with us because of this dysfunctional thinking. Another inaccurate term for this maneuver is the 180, but that sells short what is actually happening. 180 doesn't get you back to the runway, more like 220 degrees followed by an opposite 30-degree-ish turn, but the 250 turn doesn't sound as doable as the 180. But again, physics are physics, and for those preaching about how it's totally possible, it very well might be. But the problem is that it might be possible on Monday and impossible in the same aircraft and airfield on Tuesday. There are so many variables like wind speed and direction, density, altitude, and many others. So I'm not going to show you the best techniques. There's other videos for that. But when I saw another YouTuber's video on how easy the impossible turn was in something like a Cub, I became a student and thought, well, I could do that in my Cessna 210. What I took away was this. Had I had an engine out before I studied it and tried the impossible turn, I probably would have crashed and likely died. So what I do now? I brief each takeoff for what to do with loss of thrust on the runway. What I'm going to do if I have loss of thrust below 1,000, and what I'll do with the loss of thrust after that. If you take one thing away, please, please, please pre-brief this on every takeoff you do. You won't have much time to decide once you're in that situation. Decide on the ground where you have time. And train those actions at altitude. AOPA Air Safety Institute released a great video on the impossible turn recently. Check it out. Okay, let's get political. I've seen some social media posts lately about vaccine concerns, mainly, what if my airline requires a vaccine and I don't really want to take it? Well, sure, some have answered by saying, just take it, quit being a baby, it's not that big of a deal. Others responded by talking about how it's not an FDA-approved vaccine yet. Sure, there are reports of myocarditis and blood clots. Young men, 18 to 26, have a greater chance of dying from the vaccine than from actual COVID. But granted, those chances are minuscule. My issue is the transparency. When the FDA has approval of a drug, you get all the information, all the side effects, the studies showing who and how many were affected and with what. But because this has become so political, sides are hiding things, and that concerns me. You only hear about the heart trouble from the right. Meanwhile, the left has gone full-fledged PR, pushing how you need to do your part and save the people around you. Their 1984 tactics are a bit worrisome. Why not let the science speak, as they say they're doing? If 0.0004 develop blood clots, then present the info. Then let us decide what we want to do. If we want to take that lottery risk with our lives, it needs to be our decision. You want to take the vaccine, then cool, do it. If you don't want to take it, then cool, don't. But Dan, those who don't take it put us all at risk. Really? If you take the vaccine, how are you at risk? Science, right? You're protected. So why does it matter to you? The unvaccinated, according to your science, would only be a risk to the fellow unvaccinated. And that group is now in the minority anyway. I know, I'm going to get blasted on the comments. But I think it's wrong to mandate a vaccine for employment that is not FDA approved. Emergency use doesn't count. Now that's my 2 cents. You can leave me yours below. All right, EAA Air Venture, known as OSH, is happening this year, July 26th through August 1st. And yes, I'll be there. And yes, believe it or not, it'll be my first OSH. Taking Off is taking a crew, and we'll give you a bunch of videos. But somebody watching right now is going to get free tickets, and here's how. Simply tell me in the comments why you deserve the tickets to OSH. Bonus points in my book if you've never yet been. In 1 week, Christy and I will read them and pick a winner. And that's all there is to it. Tickets are being made available through a friend of the channel. Thanks, Marshall. Okay, everyone. Big thanks to our sponsors, Gold Seal, iFly GPS, Wingfield Aviation, and of course, Flying Eyes, where the discount code TakingOff gets you 10%. We work hard to find sponsors who are the good guys in aviation, and if you can support them, we all win. And thanks for supporting the channel, whether it's through the Hangar Club, Christie's Patreon, buying t-shirts, or just by watching. It all helps. I'll leave links to all that below. So take care, and remember, the superior judgment trumps superior skill.